Okay, hey music makers out there, James Russell here, and today I'm going to talk about the 5 stages of recording that you need to know and most people don't talk about. So, roll the tape. 5 stages of recording. I'm just going to break them down into separate stages because they're all pretty crucial, and they're also things that people don't generally talk about, which is why I'm doing this. So, first and foremost, we're going to talk about capturing the sound. So that's number 1, capturing the sound. Now, capturing the sound is generally going to involve using a microphone, or a DI for that matter, but it involves, when you're actually at the recording process, getting the sound right. Now, if you're using a guitar, like this, now you want to pay attention to where the sound's coming from. Now, often people try and mic the sound hole, and that's good, and it can be good and bad for a number of reasons. When sound is created, it moves air. Now that creates what's known as the proximity effect on your microphone, and proximity effect is essentially that movement of air overpowering the microphone or the diaphragm and creating popping sounds and percussive noises. Now, generally the tip for when you're capturing sound, essentially you want to listen to where the sound's coming from and then try and mic it around the edge of that. And this is where people get it wrong all the time. So most people try and mic the sound hole. If the best way to do it with an acoustic guitar is generally around the 12th fret. If you're going to use 2 mics, you do around the 12th fret and round just off the sound hole towards the base of the bell, right? But if you've only got 1 mic, then generally what you want to do is there's the sound hole, you want to mic about here, right? Can you see that? You want to mic about there. Now, why you do that? Because basically not only are you getting the sound, but you're getting less movement of air, and it's going to be less chance of overpowering your microphone. That's the reason why I use techniques like on-axis and off-axis and stuff when capturing with a microphone. To apply this, if you're, say, miking a speaker cone, you've got the round cone and the other small bit in the middle, which is part of the speaker cone, try and actually mic, instead of this flat bang in the middle of the speaker, mic around the seam. Now that will actually mean that you're still getting the sound, but it's also where that seam is actually holding things in tighter, so there's going to be less movement in the speaker, less movement of air, and you'll get a crisper sound. That also applies for things like classical instruments. Now with classical instruments, say you've got an F hole, you don't mic right over the F hole, you mount just off the edge or where that F hole is coming together. You're still getting movement of air, but you're getting the resonance of the wood. So there you go. Stage 1 is capturing the sound. Stage 2 is processing the signal, right? And stage 2, processing the signal, this is a really important one because essentially if you're, say, using an electric guitar or even an acoustic, right, essentially the signal is going to be quite weak. It's going to be what's known as an instrument level signal. Now, instrument level signal, the first thing you need to do before you can get it into the next stage of processing is you need to get that level up to what's known as line level signal. Now that will usually mean increasing it by at least 20 dB. Now to do this, you usually use what's called a preamp. Now, you guys might know what a preamp is. Preamps not only boost the signal, but they also impart colour, right? And this is the reason why there's so many preamps out there, and people always go on about preamps like 1073s, API 512s and the like, because essentially, it'll not only boost the signal, but it'll impart colour. Now, as part of that signal processing, you can also use things like EQ and compression on the way in to make sure you're strengthening that signal even more. EQ means that you can sweeten the signal a little bit and you can add some boost in the high end or boost in the low end if you're, say, recording bass or something like that. You can help accentuate some of those frequencies, but you're essentially destructively printing that on the signal. Same as what a preamp does, you're imparting that sound and it'll be forever stuck on there, which can be a good thing. And I know a lot of people are sometimes quite scared of using compression on the way in, especially producers who are first starting out. But generally, as far as there's a couple of rules that you have as far as doing that with your signal. Essentially, as I said, even with a microphone, you've got to boost that signal. Generally, instrument level signal or mic level signal needs to be boosted to line level signal, which is what you're going to use a preamp for. It'll hopefully impart some colour. That's why you use things like valve preamps and all the rest of it. They add second harmonics, or you can use numerous other things. and I'll talk about second and third harmonics in a complete another video because I could go on about them forever. But second harmonics essentially, second is valve and third harmonics is tape, and you'll see that especially when something like a distressor that adds harmonics, that's actually got an option for second and third harmonics, and that's what it generally means. But look, a preamp will boost the signal, it'll impart some sonic qualities, and you can then also process it with, say, EQ or compression. The reason why you use compression on the way in is because you can tame the peaks. A compressor essentially attenuates the signal and gives you more room to move, because it means that it'll gradually catch some of those peaks, which means you can probably get a louder signal on the way in. And a stronger signal is always good, especially in the analog world. In the digital world, sometimes you should really not go too hot because you want to avoid clipping. But in the analog world, a good strong signal is what you want. Let's talk about stage 3 of this. Stage 3 is the one that people, I find, often get wrong or don't value enough, and that's conversion. Now, we've gone and captured the audio signal, we've boosted it up to line level, and we've got a good healthy signal. And now we're doing the one thing that most people don't, especially people who use interfaces or don't work in a big studio. They kind of underestimate this stage, and most people don't even know what it is. It's the conversion of the signal. To get something from analog into a computer, you have to convert it from analog to digital, which is AD conversion, and back out, especially you're going to hear it through your monitors, DA conversion, or digital to analog, analog to digital, digital to analog if you're coming back out of a computer. So you've got to understand that it's going to be converted into a digital signal. Now this is where people sometimes underestimate what's happening there or don't fully understand it, because not only is it the quality of the converters that you're using, and there's lots of other things we could go into, clocking, jitter, timing, all that kind of stuff, but the general principle is anyway, know that you're converting something to get into the computer. Now that's really kind of important. The reason why it's important is because it comes down to things like sample rate. And I've had numerous arguments with people about this. Most of your doors that you work in are essentially going to be 44.1, 16-bit or 24-bit as the default standard sample rate. I just about never work in 44.1, and I'll tell you why. In the old days, it's because I like to be able to do what's called downsample, so I generally work in 48. Yes, you can work in high def, which is 96 and the like, but generally if you're doing rock or if you're doing any modern pop music, 48's good enough. And now iTunes have kind of won that argument for everyone, because as I said, I've argued with a couple of producers over this, but iTunes have essentially won that argument because now they've brought out Mastered for iTunes, which is 48K 24-bit. So you need to know that. So if you're going to record, downsampling at the very least, downsampling to CD, which is 44.1 16-bit, okay, you need to be able to downsample to that, but you need to, at the very least, record at a sample rate that is equivalent to the highest quality output that you're going to be using. And if Mastered for iTunes is around, I would strongly suggest 48K 24-bit at the very least, and 32-bit float. If your DAW has 32-bit float, what it essentially means, you've got a floating buffer to avoid digital clipping on the way in. But conversion's super important, so I would pay attention to your converters. Most people who work with an interface don't realise how important conversion is, because they just think they're plugging into an interface and it's working with a computer. Because once it's in there, it's digital format, you're kind of stuck with however much information you took. The fourth stage of recording is editing the signal. Now it's in the computer, and when I say editing, what I mean is that you're going to then use processes, and this is... So when I say editing, I mean that you're going to then use processes like quantizing. Quantizing means putting something in time, or tuning, especially if you've recorded a vocal and you need to make it well tuned. These days, an integral part of making any kind of music is making sure your timing and your tuning are bang on, especially in this world where everyone is so used to hearing vocals and the like that are perfectly tuned. There is just about nothing that comes out these days that isn't tuned in some shape or form. I don't care what anyone says. I know people claim that, Adele didn't tune her vocal and all the rest of it. Maybe she didn't. But generally on the whole, most of the stuff that you hear has been tuned at least with Melodyne. Being able to actually tune a vocal is what all the pros do, and definitely quantizing is what all the pros do. And that's the reason why I think I said in another video, it's so important to play to a click track. It'll save you so much more time, and essentially it'll mean you get a better result. Then we have the final stage. Now I'm throwing a couple of things in with this. I'm just going to call it the finishing process. There's numerous things. It involves mixing and mastering. I was just going to say mixing before as the final stage, but as number 5, it's the finishing process. And the reason why I'm not just saying mixing is because mastering's involved with that. So essentially what it means is you're going to balance all those elements that you've got, and then you're going to turn it into a stereo file, or bounce it down, or render it, whatever you want to call it, and then maybe you'll treat treat it afterwards, or you bounced it down with something on your master bus, but that's the finishing process. It's making sure everything works together in a cohesive fashion. All the things that you've recorded, they all work together, they all fit, and essentially then you finish your final product and put it out. So there you go. That's a quick little blurb on the 5 stages of recording. I think a lot of people sometimes get some of them misconstrued. They think some things are more important than the others, but I would say every single one of those stages is super important to really know if you're going to record something well, especially the ones that people tend to underestimate. So capturing the sound is absolutely imperative, and you've got to be good at capturing the sound, and it's the one where people sometimes don't know what they're doing, and it's an art form that literally great tracking engineers are artists within themselves, and they know how to use those processes like the signal processing, getting things with preamps. Like every time I record a band, I'm literally thinking about all the tones and all the colours that I'm going to use. I'm fortunate enough to have a pile of preamps in the studio that I work at, which is SSL, Neve, API. I've got valve ones, we've got all sorts of stuff. So, but every time I'm tracking a band, those are the colours that you're painting with. And especially the instruments that you're recording, all of those are incredibly relevant. Every one of those stages that I just talked about, all essentially impart sonic quality, or in some cases degrade sonic quality. You need to know that when you're doing conversion from analog to digital, you're actually going to lose something. That's why all these audiophiles argue that analog's always better and the like. So yeah, these days we're working with a computer, so you need to find a way to maximize whatever you're getting. And essentially, the other thing I would say, especially with converting, is try not to run things through a converter too many times, because essentially the more you're doing it, you're sampling whatever audio you're doing. So you want to try and minimize that. There's a lot of people that buy special mastering converters for when they do their final bounce. That kind of stuff, especially if they're going through analog equipment at the final process. So that is all worth considering. Those are my 5 stages of recording that you need to know to be a good engineer or producer. Hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like button, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. If you'd like me to elaborate something further, I'm James Russell, and I'll catch you next episode.